Most of us are afraid of our anger. We've been taught that anger is dangerous, unacceptable, selfish, or destructive. So we suppress it, we deny it, we judge ourselves for feeling it. But what if your anger is not the problem? What if your anger is a messenger? Anger is a natural human emotion. It arises when something sacred inside you feels violated, when a boundary is crossed, when your needs are ignored, when your truth is silenced. In that sense, anger is not your enemy, it is your protector. It is the part of you that says, this matters. The tragedy is not that we feel anger. The tragedy is that many of us learned very early in life that expressing anger was unsafe. Perhaps when you were a child, your anger was punished. Maybe you were told you were too sensitive, too dramatic, too difficult. Or perhaps the people around you were overwhelmed by their own emotions, so there was no room for yours. So you adapted. You pushed your anger down to preserve attachment, to stay loved, to stay safe. But suppressed anger does not disappear. It turns inward as shame, depression, or self-criticism. Or it explodes outward in ways that confuse even you. The question is not how to eliminate anger. The question is, how do we become conscious of it? The first step is awareness without judgment. When anger arises, instead of reacting immediately or pushing it away, pause. Notice it in your body. Is it a tightness in your chest, heat in your face, a clenching in your jaw? Anger is not just a thought, it is a physiological response. By staying with the sensation, you create space between the feeling and the action. The second step is curiosity. Ask yourself gently, what boundary feels crossed? What need is unmet? What am I protecting right now? Often beneath anger lies hurt. Beneath rage lies grief. Anger is frequently a shield for vulnerability. When you approach it with compassion rather than fear, it begins to reveal its deeper message. Processing anger does not mean acting it out, nor does it mean suppressing it. It means allowing it to move through you consciously. You might write about it, speak it aloud in private, move your body, breathe deeply. Let the energy discharge without harming yourself or others. Anger is energy, and energy needs movement. There is also a difference between healthy anger and reactive rage. Healthy anger is clear and boundaried. It says, this does the work for me. It does not attack, it asserts. Reactive rage, on the other hand, is often old pain looking for a target. When the intensity feels disproportionate to the situation, you are likely touching something much older than the present moment. This is where compassion becomes essential. Instead of shaming yourself for overreacting, ask, when have I felt this before? Who did I need to protect myself from? What did I have to silence back then? Your nervous system remembers what your mind may have forgotten. As you learn to listen to your anger rather than fear it, something profound happens. It transforms. It becomes clarity. It becomes courage. It becomes the strength to set boundaries without guilt. The more you honor your anger consciously, the less it controls you unconsciously. Your anger is not a flaw in your character. It is a signal from your inner world asking for attention. When you respond with awareness, curiosity, and compassion, anger becomes not a destructive force, but a guide back to your authentic self. Anger is one of the most misunderstood human emotions. From an early age, many of us are taught that anger is bad, inappropriate, or dangerous. We are told to calm down, to stop overreacting, to be nice. Over time, we internalize the message that anger itself is the problem. Yet anger, in its essence, is neither good nor bad. It is information. It is a signal arising from deep within the nervous system, alerting us that something important feels threatened, violated, or out of alignment. When you experience anger, something inside you is saying, this matters. It may be a boundary that has been crossed, a value that has been disrespected, or a need that has gone unmet. Anger is the emotional alarm system that activates when your integrity feels compromised. Just as physical pain alerts you to injury, anger alerts you to psychological or emotional harm. To label anger as the enemy is to silence the very mechanism designed to protect you. The difficulty is not anger itself, but our relationship to it. Many people learned early in life that expressing anger risked rejection or punishment. If a child grows up in an environment where caregivers are overwhelmed, emotionally unavailable, or volatile, the child quickly understands that their anger is inconvenient or unsafe. To preserve connection, they suppress it. Attachment becomes more important than authenticity. In that adaptation, anger is pushed down, denied, or turned inward. Yet suppressed anger does not disappear. It lives in the body. It can show up as chronic tension, fatigue, irritability, anxiety, or even depression. Sometimes it leaks out in passive-aggressive behaviors or sudden emotional outbursts that seem disproportionate to the present situation. What is often labeled as being too sensitive or too reactive may actually be the resurfacing of anger that was never allowed expression. When we begin to see anger as a messenger rather than an enemy, our approach shifts dramatically. Instead of asking, how do I get rid of this, we begin to ask, what is this trying to tell me? That question alone changes everything. It creates space for awareness instead of shame. It allows curiosity instead of self-judgment. Anger often guards deeper emotions. Beneath it there may be hurt, disappointment, fear, or grief. The anger arises first because it mobilizes energy. It prepares the body for action. It gives strength where vulnerability might feel too exposed. When someone feels dismissed, unseen, or betrayed, anger can surface as a protective shield. If we attack the shield, we miss the wounded part it is defending. Listening to anger requires slowing down. It involves noticing the physical sensations, the heat in the chest, the tightening of the jaw, the surge of adrenaline. These sensations are not signs of moral failure. They are signs that your system is activated. By staying present with the experience rather than reacting immediately, you allow the message to unfold. You might discover that what angers you most are situations where you abandon yourself, remain silent when you want to speak, or tolerate what feels intolerable. Anger, in its healthy form, supports boundaries and self-respect. It says no when no is needed. It asserts truth without cruelty. When honored consciously, anger strengthens relationships because it allows authenticity. When denied, it erodes them through resentment and distance. To recognize anger as a messenger is to reclaim it as part of your humanity. It becomes not something to fear, but something to understand. And in understanding it, you begin to understand yourself more deeply. When anger is not allowed expression, it does not simply dissolve. Emotions are movements of energy within the body, and when that movement is blocked, it looks for another path. Many people learn early in life that anger threatens connection. A child who senses that a parent is overwhelmed, critical, or emotionally unavailable quickly understands that expressing frustration or protest may lead to withdrawal, punishment, or shame. In order to preserve attachment, the child suppresses anger. This suppression is not a conscious choice. It is an intelligent survival strategy. But what protects us in childhood often constrains us in adulthood. When anger is turned inward, it frequently transforms into self-criticism. Instead of recognizing that something external felt hurtful or unjust, the individual assumes, there must be something wrong with me. The energy that might have been used to assert a boundary becomes internalized as guilt, shame, or inadequacy. Over time, this pattern can harden into chronic low self-esteem or depression. Depression, in many cases, is anger without a voice. The body carries the weight of unexpressed protest, and vitality diminishes. Suppressed anger can also manifest physically. The nervous system remains in a subtle state of activation, as though preparing for a response that never comes. Muscles tighten. The jaw clenches. The breath becomes shallow. Headaches, digestive issues, fatigue, and chronic pain can sometimes reflect emotions that have been consistently restrained. The body remembers what the mind avoids. When anger is not permitted conscious acknowledgement, it may speak through physical symptoms. For others, suppressed anger does not turn inward quietly, it builds pressure. Like steam trapped in a sealed container, it accumulates over time. Small frustrations that might otherwise be manageable begin to carry disproportionate intensity. A minor disagreement triggers explosive rage. The reaction appears excessive, even to the person experiencing it. In these moments, it is not just the present situation being expressed. It is the backlog of years of unspoken resentment, unmet needs, and swallowed words. This outward explosion often leads to regret and shame, reinforcing the belief that anger is dangerous. The individual may promise never to react that way again, only to repeat the cycle. Suppression and eruption become two sides of the same dynamic. The more tightly anger is controlled, the more forcefully it eventually breaks through. Neither extreme brings relief because neither involves conscious processing. Reactive outbursts are frequently misinterpreted as character flaws. In reality, they are signals of unresolved pain. When someone reacts intensely, it often means an old wound has been touched. The nervous system does not distinguish clearly between past and present. It responds to perceived threat. If anger was historically unsafe to express, it may surface later in environments where the stakes feel lower, or where accumulated pressure finally overrides restraint. Understanding this dynamic requires compassion rather than condemnation. Suppressed anger reflects adaptation. It reflects a time when authenticity had to be sacrificed for belonging or safety. The challenge in adulthood is to create new internal permission. Permission to feel anger without acting destructively. Permission to acknowledge hurt without collapsing into shame. When anger is neither buried nor explosively discharged, but instead recognized, named, and explored, the cycle begins to shift. The energy that once fueled self-attack or uncontrolled rage can become clarity and assertiveness. But as long as anger remains suppressed, it will continue to seek expression, either against the self or against the world. The moment anger arises, most people react not only to the situation, but to the feeling itself. There's an almost immediate layer of judgment. I shouldn't feel this way. I am overreacting. This is childish. That secondary response often creates more suffering than the original trigger. The anger becomes entangled with shame, and instead of understanding the emotion, we begin fighting ourselves. This inner conflict intensifies the nervous system and narrows our capacity for clarity. Awareness without judgment interrupts that cycle. To be aware without judgment means to notice what is happening inside you as it is happening without labeling it as good or bad. It is a deliberate pause. Instead of immediately speaking, defending, withdrawing, or attacking, you turn your attention inward. You observe. You might notice heat rising in your chest, tightness in your throat, a clenching in your stomach, or a rush of energy through your arms. These sensations are not moral failures, they are physiological responses. The body is mobilizing energy because it perceives something important. When you observe these sensations without condemning them, you create space between stimulus and response. That space is transformative. In that brief gap, you are no longer fully possessed by the emotion. You are experiencing it, but you are also witnessing it. This dual awareness allows choice. Without it, anger tends to drive behavior automatically, shaped by old conditioning and unconscious patterns. Judgment shuts down curiosity. If you decide instantly that your anger is wrong, you will likely suppress it or justify it defensively. Both reactions block understanding. Non-judgmental awareness, on the other hand, invites inquiry. You can gently ask, what just happened? What did that moment mean to me? Why did my body respond so strongly? These questions are not accusatory. They are explorations. They treat anger as meaningful rather than problematic. This approach also calms the nervous system. When you fight your anger, your body interprets that resistance as additional threat. Stress hormones remain elevated, but when you acknowledge the emotion, yes, anger is here right now, the system often begins to settle. You are signaling safety to yourself. You are saying that your internal experience is allowed. Paradoxically, acceptance reduces intensity more effectively than suppression. Awareness without judgment requires practice because many of us were conditioned to judge our emotional world harshly. We may have internalized critical voices that labeled strong feelings as weakness or disrespect. To shift this pattern, compassion is essential. When anger arises, imagine responding to yourself the way you would to a distressed child, not by shaming, but by paying attention. The goal is not to immediately solve the situation, but to fully recognize the internal state. As you strengthen this capacity, you may begin to notice subtle layers beneath the anger. Perhaps there is hurt. Perhaps there is fear of being dismissed or unseen. These deeper emotions often remain hidden when judgment dominates. Awareness softens the protective armor enough for vulnerability to surface. The first step in processing anger is not expression or analysis, but presence. Simply allowing the emotion to exist in your awareness, without rushing to fix or silence it, lays the foundation for everything that follows. In that presence, anger shifts from an overwhelming force into an experience you can understand and navigate consciously. Anger often presents itself as strong, sharp, and certain. It feels decisive. It carries energy and momentum. Because of that intensity, it can seem like the final truth of the moment. But anger is frequently a surface emotion, a protective layer that rises quickly to guard something more vulnerable underneath. When we meet anger with curiosity instead of reaction, we begin to uncover the deeper emotional landscape it is protecting. Curiosity changes the entire internal dynamic. Instead of assuming that anger tells the whole story, you begin to ask gentle, open-ended questions. What did this situation touch in me? Why did it matter so much? What felt threatened? These questions are not about blaming yourself or invalidating your anger. They are about understanding it more fully. Anger, when explored with care, often leads to unexpected discoveries. Very often beneath anger lies hurt. A comment that sparks rage may actually have triggered a feeling of being dismissed, unseen, or unvalued. The anger surges forward because hurt feels too vulnerable to expose. Hurt carries the risk of rejection or humiliation, especially for those who learned early in life that vulnerability was unsafe. Anger, by contrast, feels powerful. It mobilizes the body. It creates a sense of control. In this way, anger can function as emotional armor. At other times, beneath anger there is fear. Fear of abandonment. Fear of not being respected. Fear of losing control. When the nervous system perceives threat, it prepares for fight or flight. Anger corresponds to the fight response. It gives strength and readiness. But if we stop at the anger, we may never recognize the fear driving it. Curiosity allows us to slow down enough to sense the trembling beneath the tension. Grief can also sit beneath anger. When expectations collapse or relationships change, sadness may be the core emotion. Yet grief can feel heavy and immobilizing, while anger feels activating. The psyche sometimes prefers anger because it carries movement. By approaching anger with curiosity, we may discover unacknowledged losses, lost hopes, lost safety, lost recognition that are asking to be mourned rather than fought. Curiosity requires a shift from judgment to compassion. Instead of saying, "I shouldn't feel this anger," we might say, "Something in me is hurting." That subtle change invites softness. It creates internal safety for deeper emotions to emerge. The body often provides clues. If you sit quietly and notice the sensations beneath anger, you may feel a tightening in the chest that signals sadness, or a hollow sensation in the stomach that hints at fear. These bodily cues guide you toward the underlying truth. When deeper emotions are acknowledged, the intensity of anger often shifts. It may not disappear immediately, but it becomes clearer and less explosive. Instead of a generalized rage, there is specificity. I felt ignored. I felt betrayed. I felt afraid. The specificity brings empowerment because it allows for direct communication and authentic boundaries. Curiosity does not invalidate anger, it completes it. It honors the protective function while also listening for the vulnerable message it carries. Over time, this practice builds emotional literacy. You become more fluent in your internal language. Rather than being driven by anger or suppressing it, you learn from it. And in that learning, your emotional responses become more grounded, more conscious, and more aligned with your true needs. Anger in its healthy form is a boundary-setting emotion. It arises in the present moment in response to something that feels misaligned, intrusive, or disrespectful. Healthy anger is clear. It does not seek to humiliate or destroy. It seeks to protect. It says, "This does not work for me." It communicates limits with firmness but without cruelty. There is strength in it, but there is also stability. The nervous system may be activated, yet there is still awareness and choice. When anger is healthy, it is proportionate to the situation. If someone interrupts you repeatedly, you might feel irritated and assert you need to be heard. If a colleague crosses a professional boundary, you may calmly but directly address it. The emotion moves through you, supports appropriate action, and then settles. There is no lingering storm inside. Once the boundary is expressed, the system returns to balance. Healthy anger protects self-respect without disconnecting you from yourself or others. Reactive rage feels different. It often carries an intensity that exceeds the immediate trigger. A small comment ignites a disproportionate explosion. A minor inconvenience sparks overwhelming fury. In those moments, the reaction is not only about the present. It is fueled by unresolved experiences from the past. Old wounds, especially those formed in childhood, remain stored in the nervous system. When something in the current environment resembles those earlier experiences, even subtly, the body reacts as if the original threat has returned. For example, someone who grew up feeling ignored may experience intense rage when they perceive being dismissed. Even if the situation is relatively minor, the reaction is amplified because it is layered with years of accumulated hurt. The nervous system does not carefully separate past from present. It responds to patterns. Reactive rage is often the voice of unmet needs that were never acknowledged. It carries the emotional charge of moments when there was no power, no voice, no protection. Unlike healthy anger, reactive rage tends to override awareness. It narrows perception. The mind becomes rigid and absolute. There is little room for nuance or dialogue. Afterward, there may be shame, confusion, or regret. The individual might wonder why they reacted so strongly. This confusion is understandable because the visible trigger does not seem large enough to justify the internal explosion. The true source lies deeper. Understanding this distinction is crucial because it shifts the focus from blame to inquiry. Instead of labeling oneself as volatile or broken, one can ask, what old pain was touched? Reactive rage signals that a younger part of the self is still carrying unresolved hurt. It is not a character flaw, but a protective response that once served a purpose. Developing healthier anger involves recognizing when the present moment is being colored by the past. It requires pausing long enough to differentiate between current boundaries and historical wounds. When awareness is present, you can respond to today's situation without unconsciously reliving yesterday's injuries. Healthy anger strengthens relationships because it fosters clarity and mutual respect. Reactive rage, when understood compassionately, becomes an invitation to heal the underlying wounds that continue to seek expression through intensity. When anger arises, the instinct for many people is to either suppress it or justify it. Rarely are we taught to meet it with compassion. Yet compassion is precisely what allows anger to evolve from a reactive force into a source of clarity and strength. Without compassion, anger tends to harden into resentment or explode into aggression. With compassion, it becomes understandable, workable, and ultimately transformative. Compassion begins with the recognition that anger has a reason. Even if the reaction feels excessive or confusing, it did not appear out of nowhere. Something in you felt threatened, dismissed, hurt, or overwhelmed. Instead of asking, "What is wrong with me?" compassion asks, "What happened inside me?" That subtle shift replaces self-attack with curiosity and care. It acknowledges that your nervous system responded in the only way it knew how in that moment. For many people, anger carries an additional burden of shame. They may have been labeled difficult, dramatic, or aggressive in the past. As a result, when anger surfaces, an internal critic immediately condemns it. This self-judgment intensifies the distress. Compassion interrupts that pattern by creating internal safety. When you allow yourself to feel anger without condemnation, the nervous system begins to settle. The emotion no longer needs to escalate to be heard. Compassion does not mean excusing harmful behavior. It does not justify lashing out or hurting others. Rather, it creates the space necessary to understand what is driving the reaction before acting on it. In that space, anger becomes clear. You may begin to see that what felt like pure fury was actually disappointment, or fear, or a longing to be respected. Compassion softens the defensive edge of anger enough for these deeper truths to emerge. As clarity increases, strength naturally follows. Strength rooted in compassion is different from strength fueled by rage. Rage seeks to overpower. Compassionate strength seeks to assert. It allows you to say no without hostility, to express hurt without accusation, and to set boundaries without guilt. This kind of strength is steady rather than explosive. It does not depend on dominating others. It depends on being aligned with yourself. Compassion also helps untangle present triggers from past wounds. When a reaction feels disproportionately intense, a compassionate approach might ask, "When have I felt this before?" Often, current anger is amplified by unresolved experiences from earlier life. By acknowledging the younger parts of yourself that once felt powerless or unseen, you integrate those experiences instead of reenacting them. Anger then shifts from a reenactment of old pain into a guide toward healing. Over time, practicing compassion with your anger changes your relationship with it. The emotion becomes less frightening and less controlling. You begin to trust that you can feel it fully without being consumed by it. In that trust, anger reveals its constructive purpose. It highlights where change is needed, where boundaries must be strengthened, and where authenticity has been compromised. When compassion is present, anger no longer feels like an enemy storm to survive. It becomes a signal you can interpret wisely. It becomes a force that supports integrity rather than undermines it. And in that transformation, anger evolves into clarity about what matters most and the inner strength to stand firmly in alignment with it. So as you leave here today, do not ask yourself how to eliminate anger from your life. Ask yourself how to listen to it more honestly. Your anger is not a sign that you are broken. It is a sign that something within you longs to be acknowledged, respected, and protected. When you meet it with awareness instead of judgment, with curiosity instead of fear, and with compassion instead of shame, it stops being destructive and starts being instructive. Every time you pause instead of react, every time you choose understanding over suppression, you reclaim a part of yourself that once had to stay silent. In that reclamation, anger becomes clarity. It becomes the courage to speak truth without cruelty, to set boundaries without guilt, and to honor your needs without apology. The work is not about becoming less emotional. It is about becoming more conscious. And when you allow your anger to guide you toward deeper self-understanding, you are not losing control. You are gaining integrity.